George's Secret Key to the Universe, Chapter 13. The comet was now traveling straight again. In front of them, the sun was bigger and brighter than before, but still very small compared to its size seen from the Earth. George spotted another bright dot that he hadn't noticed before, a dot that was quickly growing bigger as they approached it. "What's over there?" he asked, pointing ahead and to the right. "Is that another planet?" But there was no reply. When he looked around, Annie had gone. George untied himself from the comet and followed the trail of footprints she had left in the icy powder. He carefully gauged the length of his steps so that he wouldn't find himself flying off the comet again. After climbing carefully over a small icy hill, he saw her. She was peering into a hole into the ground. Around the hole were bits and pieces of rock that seemed to have been spat out by the comet itself. George walked over and looked up and down the hole too. It was a few feet deep, with nothing much to be seen at the bottom. "What is it?" he asked. "Have you found something?" "Well, you see, I went for a walk," Annie started to explain. "Why didn't you tell me?" George interrupted her. "You were shouting at me about not shouting," said Annie. "So I thought I'd just go by myself, because then there'd be no one to get mad at me," she added pointedly. "I'm not mad at you," said George. "Yes, you are. You're always angry with me. It doesn't make any difference if I'm nice to you or not." "I'm not angry!" shouted George. "Yes, you are!" shouted Annie back, balling her gloved hand into fists and shaking them at George. As she did so, something extraordinary happened. A little fountain of gas and dirt blew up from the ground next to her. "Now look what you've done," complained George. But as he spoke, another little fountain erupted through the rock right next to him. It formed a cloud of dust that slowly dispersed. "Annie, what's happening?" he asked. It's nothing," replied Annie. "This is all fine. Don't worry." But she didn't sound very sure. "Why don't we go and sit down over there where we were before?" she suggested. "It's nicer over there." But as they walked back, more and more little geysers of dust erupted around them, leaving a haze of smoke in the air. Neither of them felt very safe, but neither of them wanted to admit it. They just walked more and more quickly toward the place where they'd been sitting before. Without saying a word, they anchored themselves into the comet once more. In the sky, the bright dot George had seen growing had become much bigger, and now looked like a planet with red and blue stripes. "That's Jupiter," said Annie, breaking the silence. But she was whispering now. She didn't like the sound of the confident show-off she had been earlier. "It's the biggest of all planets, about twice the volume of Saturn. That makes it more than 1,000 times the volume of Earth." "Does Jupiter have moons, too?" George asked. "Yes, it does," replied Annie. "But I don't know how many. I didn't count them last time I was there, so I'm not sure." "Have you really been here before?" George looked suspicious. "Of course I have," said Annie indignantly. George wasn't sure he believed her. Once again, the comet and Annie and George started to fall. As they fell, George gazed at Jupiter. Even by Saturn's standards, Jupiter was enormous. As they flew by, Annie pointed out a big red mark on Jupiter's surface. "That thing," she said, "is a huge storm. It's been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, maybe even more. I don't know. It's over twice the size of the Earth." As they moved away from Jupiter, George counted how many moons he could spot. 4 big ones, he said. 4 big ones what?" "Moons. Jupiter has 4 big moons and lots of little moons. I think it has even more moons than Saturn." "Oh, okay," said Annie, who was sounding nervous now. "If you say so." George was worried. It wasn't like Annie to agree with anything he had said. He noticed that she had shuffled a little closer to him. She slipped her hands in its space gloves into his. All around them, new jets of gas and dust were springing up out of the rock, each one spitting out a small cloud. A thin haze was forming over the whole comet. "Are you all right?" asked Annie. She had stopped showing off and being rude, and he felt sure something was very wrong. "George, Annie started to reply, when a huge rock smashed into the comet behind them, shaking the ground like an earthquake and sending up even more dust and ice into the air. Looking up, George and Annie saw that there were hundreds and hundreds of rocks, all coming toward them at high speeds, and there was nowhere to hide. "Asteroids!" cried Annie. "We're in an asteroid storm!" Alright, so on page 122 here, there's a little piece of information about Jupiter, so let's read that. Jupiter is the fifth closest planet to the Sun. Average distance to the Sun is 483.6 million miles. The diameter of the equator is 88,846 miles, corresponding to 11,209 diameter the equator on Earth. So the equator is the length around the middle of the planet. The surface area is 120.5 times the Earth's surface area. The volume is 1,321.3 times Earth's volume. The mass is 317.8 times the Earth's mass. The gravity at the equator is 236% of Earth's gravity at the Earth's equator. That means that it has less gravity, so if you were standing at the equator on Jupiter, there would be almost no gravity and you would kind of just float away. The structure is small compared to the overall size of the planets. Its rocky core is surrounded by a liquid metal layer that smoothly turns into a liquid hydrogen layer as height increases. This liquid smoothly turns into an atmosphere made of hydrogen gas, which surrounds it all. Even though it's bigger, Jupiter's overall composition is similar to Saturn. The Great Red Spot on Jupiter's surface is a giant hurricane-type storm, a storm that has lasted for more than 3 centuries. It was first observed in 1655, but it may have been there for even longer. The Great Red Spot storm is huge, more than twice the size of Earth. Winds on Jupiter often reach 620 miles per hour. It takes Jupiter 11.6 Earth years to circle around Sun. So far, Jupiter has 63 confirmed moons. 4 of them are big enough to be round and were seen by the Italian scientist Galileo in 1610. These are collectively known as the Galilean Moons. They are Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, and are about the same size as our moon.